All right, welcome everyone to the second talk of today. We now have Martin Neumann, who will
Naumann.
Naumann, who will talk about a little bit more detail about how we can use web components.
All right. So I'm going to talk about real-world web components. Grüezi wohl. I'm not a Swiss person, so that is actually probably offending. If I offended some Swiss people here, I apologize, but I try my best. It's actually pretty tricky to get these things right because sometimes people get offended when you do not get Swiss German right. So you may know me from Twitter, where I'm now Geekonaut. I have been another name which I switched. I'm still IVGP and Martin Naumann on GitHub. I blog sometimes, and I love the web. And if you ever miss a slide and you want to show something right now to someone, the slides are already online. However, please look at me and what I'm doing because there will be live demos that will not sort of happen online. So I'm not using WebSockets or something to actually stream that as well. These slides are actually also web technology and web components, actually. So now we're going to have a journey of roughly 45 minutes, hopefully. Depends on if the live demos take a little longer. First of all, I'm going to go into the history of the web, which has now accumulated 25 years of fun. In the literal sense and in the sense of fun for us developers sometimes, as Peter Paul earlier today pointed out. Then we're going to look at web components. So that's going to be an introduction into the topic. What are web components? Who has already worked with web components? Hands up. That's a few. OK, most of them, of you guys didn't. That's cool. So you're going to get an introduction for free as well. And then at the last part, we're going to see where we are in terms of what can we do now, what can't we do yet, where should we be careful of, and what's the pitfalls that we're going to hit for a couple of other years. Right, so let's start with HTML. HTML started in 1991 with a handful of possible tags. And if you look at the tags, you see something that definitely points out that we're going to talk about documents for a long time. So for example, the address bit, the menu, the directory. That's actually interesting. The menu, the directory, that sort of points out that we're going to talk about files and linking files together, as is the link tag. And this is how it started. However, 2 years later, things started to indicate a change, which is the forms elements happened, or the forms tags. So now you could not just consume a document, you could actually interact with it. Not much, but you could do basic things. You could put stuff into fields and send a mail, and yay. That, however, most of the time just opened your mail program, Outlook or whatever was on Mac back then, to send the mail to the webmaster or whatever. 2 years later, people tried to get HTML 3.0 running. However, that actually summed up, it was a monster. 150 pages of specs accumulated. And yet, that did not cover all the proprietary things that happened during the browser wars. That wasn't very cool, so it didn't happen. Then, 3 years later, it actually happened, but it was now called HTML 4.0. And the most ridiculous addition were these three modes: the strict mode, where it actually followed the specification, the transitional mode, that follows the principle of do not break the web, and then the frame sets. Who has been using frame sets? See, there is a couple of people already in our craft that go like, what? And that's good. Anyway, so then the big gap happened. Nothing really happened during 10 years. And so basically, the W3C let us hanging there, which is not quite right because the W3C was doing work. However, they were focusing on XHTML and things that we now know in hindsight were a dead end. However, meanwhile, on the web, something else happened. The web moved on. So we started with these forms, 1993, or 1995, no, 1993. But now we're actually doing more complicated things. This is still HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. However, it's much, much more sophisticated, and it doesn't really look like a document anymore. So the problem we now encountered, while the W3C was doing other things, is that HTML is still for documents. It is, to this day, hypertext markup language. That is along the lines of RTF, doc, or ODT. all right? It's not really made for building applications, but the web had this .com boom, and it still goes on. I'm not using a mail client anymore. I use a browser mail system. I do not use an IDE most of the times because I can do it in Cloud9, and if my computer goes up in flames, which with a MacBook might be actually very, very likely at some points, if you use virtual machines and stuff, it sometimes just blows up. I don't care. I could just throw it out of the window. You could steal it. I'm like, yeah, well, that's unlucky. Huh? I have another notebook for a couple $100, and I just move on. I will even have the cursor of my MacBook still there, right? So I don't need to actually install fat clients for most of the things that I do. But the browser still is behind. So how do we get nicely from this into this with a thing that is made for documents? Well, we extend. We build on top of what we have because it's an extensible thing, right? So that was for the history. Let's just quickly summarize the most important point. The web has been there for quite a while now, and it is made for documents, and HTML is still made for documents. But we're not building documents, or not just documents. We're now building applications with it. So here comes a problem. This example, I hope you can read it. Is there anyone having troubles reading this? No, that's good. So basically, all I want is a filterable list that is very common these days. So I want a Chuck Norris joke about Mars, and oops. Yeah, wonderful. And that should be easy, right? Now, technically, with HTML5, it is, because there is components that do this. However, if you would just ignore that last bit, you would end up with something like this. You have a div with a specific class that has a form inside, or form elements. I was too lazy to actually put the form in. Boo me. And then a list with all the items. And then you have some JavaScript. Maybe you even have another CSS style sheet that styles it and makes it more nice, better looking than this thing here. And then you actually use the class, which is over here, to then add event listeners to certain things, and then do stuff on this. And it gets nice. It works. It does the trick. However, if you put that into a real-world application, and you have multiple of those, this thing will immediately fall over and die. Yay, because it has all these wonderful IDs and stuff like that collapse and collide, and not very nice. I could do more effort here and make it nicer. However, you still have to match the proper structure that I defined in my JavaScript and my CSS. You would still have to include the script. You would still have to include the CSS files. And you have a monster like this. In this particular example, it's very simple. But if you have used Bootstrap or something, yeah, it's not that simple. You have multiple levels of nesting, and that gets pretty hairy. And what I mean when I say it gets hairy is, for me, it feels like this. It feels a bit like yak shaving. I want to do something, and in order to do that, I encounter a problem, so I have to fix the next problem. And I encounter another problem, which I try to fix. So I encounter another problem, which then in turn takes me to trying to fix that one, and I find out, oh crap, I don't have the necessary things. And I try to get the necessary things, but then there's a browser that doesn't support it, and in the end, my boss or my users say, what the hell, come on, I did that in PowerPoint, and it shouldn't be too hard to make that a web application. Yeah, great. So I don't want to work like that. We had to have been working like this for now. However, we could try harder. So one way of trying harder is these three options. You could just go like, I don't see a problem. Or you actually try to bring it into the browser. Yeah, nah, that's not really an option, right? So actually, you have to sort of get into working with the W3C and get this standardized. The problem with that is that the W3C has this rule of do not break the web, which is awesome. Nonetheless, there's lots of people who have some sort of political agenda or who have their own interests and their own goals, and you have to sort of bring them together, and then ends up in situations like this. If you read the mailing list or the IRC chat logs, there is some, in British English you would say meeting with no biscuits, or you could say there's some heated up discussions sometimes. And as a web worker, I have better things to do than just catching up with trolling or heated discussions. I just want to get my work done. So what can we do? Now, we were left to our own terms, and that mostly meant that we pretended that there's no problem in actually doing this hairy hacking. However, there's web components now that tries to solve this problem for us. So what is web components, or what are web components? It's sort of HTMLception, because what it means is that we're now able to build new elements and extend the platform using the platform. So you do not have to write C++ code in the browsers anymore. You do not have to write Objective-C if you want to get your hands dirty in iOS stuff and work for Apple. You can just use the web technologies that you're already familiar with and build new things on top of it. You can extend the platform in the platform technologies themselves. So these are primarily these 4 standards. And they're in no particular order. You can use and pick and match whatever you feel like. So you could use just the template element or just custom elements or just the shadow DOM, and it works. However, put these into combination, bundle them together, and you have a very, very powerful stack of awesomeness. And now I'm going to cover what these things are. Let's start with template elements. So here we see a button that says make a headline, yay. And then we have some JavaScript that uses this button to then query the template over here, then ask me for the text content of it and append it. And I can do that. I can demo it works by saying, hey, hello, Zurich. Ta-da. Now, what's the benefit of this? This is a nice play around thing, but why would I do this? First of all, appending to the DOM has always been a performance problem. If you're familiar with the benchmarks, and I reran them because I was reading the book High Performance JavaScript, and the benchmarks there are a tad outdated. So in most browsers, except for IE8 and older, you will actually see that when you use, for example, document body dot inner HTML plus equals something something, and try to run that 2,000 times in a row, your browser is likely to hang for a while. Then there's the possibility of saying, all right, fine, I'm using create element. That is a possibility. Document.createElement creates a new element that you can then append as using append child or insert child. And then there is this, the template, which is a document fragment, and it's much faster. I'm saying much faster. In most browsers, it's much faster. In some browsers, it's only slightly faster. Some browsers do not support it. Then you have to fall back to document fragments. But it's a faster way of getting inert, which means this thing here hasn't been evaluated. So if there would be an image, it wouldn't have been downloaded until I say down here, put this into the DOM. So we have an inert bit of DOM markup that we can at any point make live and insert into our DOM in a very performant manner. So there has been templating engines all around, Mustache and Handlebars and how they're all called. Now we have that sort of natively in HTML, and it's fast. So if someone says the DOM is slow, ask them what they mean by that. They might be just wrong. Then there's the shadow DOM, because what happens if in the wonderful template I have some styling? For example, I could say style, yeah, now it gets ugly. Style H1 color red. And if I click a test for make headline and say test, it's red. That's cool. However, if I have something else that has a higher specific, for example, oh shit, that was bullshit. Style / style. And I say something like, oh god, body H1 color green. And I have an H1 somewhere here, ready for fun, test 1. And I run this again. That works, but the problem is if I now would have, that's a bad example, if I would now have another button here that would actually insert another H1 from some other template, that would also turn red. I can't really make up a good example, but if you remember back the filter list, we had an ID in there. So the problem with that is it collides because it is exposed into the surrounding document. But what happens here is if I say make a headline, so now I have 3 headlines, right? And now we look at the code down here. that says if I click test, it does a query selector all H1. So it selects all these headlines, 3 we have here, and asks for how many are there, and then it puts that out into an alert. And I now click test for headlines. I get 1. 1. If that would have an ID, I wouldn't see it. If that would have a class, I wouldn't see it. It is isolated. Important point here, the isolation is for styling. The isolation is not perfect. It is not secure. If you want to use Shadow DOM for security, sorry, you're doing it wrong. I'll show you how to actually grab into this Shadow DOM. The difference how I'm actually using Shadow DOM here is very simple. The only thing that actually changed is here, down here, I use the create shadow root. So if we go back one example, you see here I'm directly using the content of the template. I use the template element over here, get the content, and append the child directly into the body, making it a headline as you would. Here, in contrast, I still get the template content, but what I do is I actually use the div element that I create to actually append later on. I make it a shadow root, and I actually put the template content into the shadow root, and then append the container that has the shadow root. Was that clear so far? All right. And that means that now it's isolated and cannot be seen by the surrounding document. Are you having trouble seeing this? In which case, I may try making it a little larger. I see, okay, if it is a problem, here's lots of space in the first row. All right, now I have this, and it's still a bit quirky and a bit weird. So now I have the custom elements, which allow me to actually bundle this up as a new HTML tag, which comes in handily. So now what I can do is, here I say, well, where is it? There. Here I say I register a new element called xHeadline that takes a prototype object. The prototype object is just basically cloning from the HTML prototype, HTML element prototype. And then I have some callbacks, the created callback and the attached callback. So what happens is I can now add something that I would call an xHeadline test, xHeadline, and that asks me for the content. Why does it do that? Well, first of all, we start off with having a template again. In the created callback that is called every single time the parser encounters this. So the parser goes through this page and goes, oh, an xHeadline that has been registered at some point, so I now can resolve this. I call the created callback. In the created callback, I just log something for testing. I then create a shadow root, and then so basically in the create, I set up my DOM that it's going to be attached to the actual document. And then once that has happened and the browser starts rendering, what happens is the attached callback gets called. And in the attached callback, I ask for the text content to be the property that I enter in the window prompt. So if I now say yay, yay, it happens there. And it's still isolated because it's still in the shadow DOM, and the test for headlines doesn't work. That's cool. Anyway, it's isolated. Yeah, so it's basically just that. I register a new element that uses a prototype object where I have a couple of callbacks that I can use to actually prepare my element and get it ready. Now that's nice and fine, but I don't want to prompt the user. I want to use declarative things, so I would like to actually have the test in here rather than anything else. How do I do that? Well, I use the content tag that is part of the shadow DOM specification inside here, and I just remove the attached callback because I don't need it. And now that's a problem with the demos because they are reloading, but the browser actually has registered the element already, so I need to actually change that into xHeadline2, and I make this an xHeadline2, and I refresh, et voila, it works. So now, all I need to do is, to actually use this element, is I just have this line. It's an xHeadline2 tag. It looks pretty much the same as the browser tags do, with the slight difference that I have a dash in the name. The dash is mandatory because the browser needs a way to actually figure out, oh, that's a custom element that I at some point need to wait for until it's registered. Once it's registered, I can then use it to actually fire the callbacks and make it work. So the dash is mandatory. However, how you call your tag is up to you. I could call this front-end conf headline if I would feel like it. No issue with that at all. So yeah, now that is nice. However, it doesn't solve our original problem quite yet, because, okay, we have the templates, good. We have the element, good. We have isolation, so that stuff that happens in here stays in here, good. But still, I mean, it's not really much better than the filter list, because I still have HTML markup that doesn't really belong to my application. It does belong to the component. And I have tons of JavaScript. I mean, that's just the starting point. And if you actually build a sophisticated element, then it gets larger than that. Obviously, I could offload this into an external style sheet, but still, it doesn't solve the problem. I still have to include that style sheet. I still have to somehow keep the templates around. Imagine doing that with 20 components. That's not really cool, right? So how can you actually overcome this problem? That's the fourth and last one of the 4 standards. This is using it, a component that does exactly what the first example does. And now actually that looks pretty nice and clean, right? This is how it should be done, I think. And I think most of the people would agree. Who doesn't agree that this is nice? You don't, because you can't see it. Aha, good boy. 2 thumbs up. Anyway, so what we do here is we just have another link that says import, and that's new, import the filter list HTML that has all these hairy JavaScript and CSS and templates and all these things. It could actually, that one could in turn load other web components if it feels like. And I don't care at all. I, as the developer of my application, just say, I want a filter list. And that has list and items in that because it's a list. And I'm done. And that is pretty cool. And that it works, I can show by saying I want to Chuck Norris room about the rooms. And the Chuck Norris note goes, the average room bears 73,658 ways for Chuck Norris to kill you, including the room itself. Right. So that's nice and fine. But it still doesn't really look nice. And as usually, I do want to style my elements, and I actually want to do things with them. So how does that work? And that's a question I get asked very often. There's 3 ways of doing this. So this is a badly done template. So this filter list extendable or themable has built in a theme that is called dark. And then what it does, it checks if it's in the dark element. I could actually make that a class of this filter list, so that's not a problem. And then it turns into this. OK, now the next problem is why that might make sense for a couple of components that are part of a framework or front-end library or UI style. That's fine, because then, for example, Bootstrap has, or I don't know the Bootstrap styles, but I do know that Topcode has this mobile light and mobile dark and desktop light and desktop dark. So these are sort of hardwired themes. And I could just use them here, and I could say mobile dark, and then that's it. But that's not sufficient. That doesn't make me happy yet. So there's another possibility, and that's the shadow property. And you can see it here. This is actually the style of the document, so it's not inside my component. And I can tell, hey, please use the dash, the colon shadow h1. So the h1 in this element now is stylable. And I make it color red. And then I use the news box, and then I have the headline. And what you can see here is, actually, the news box has a headline, which is this. It's an h1, and which is semantically a bad idea, but ignore that for the moment. The X headline also uses an h1. And as you can see, the color red only applies to the first level of components. Yes, so that is hopefully what I want to do, because if components inside do something else, then I should not really touch them, because I don't know. That's actually very deep into the tree if that is a good idea. However, that doesn't mean that you can't. So this is the deep operator, and the deep operator is used to actually traverse as deep as possible into these shadow trees. So this goes into the news box and makes this red, and then it goes into the headline and makes that red as well. All right, that's nice. That's very deep, which is really handy, because this thing actually is useful in other contexts as well. For example, if you ever needed to style a video tag, for example, you want the slider for the play moment to be green instead of red, or instead of, I don't even know what the browsers do these days, gray, then you could just use you inspect the video tag of the browsers, and then you use the deep to actually select the range slider, and then you say background green, and you're done. So that's pretty cool. It's a bit dangerous, but it's cool, as with all the dangerous things. All right, next big question is, how do the dependencies get resolved? That isn't answered in the specs yet. So the specs basically say, if you need a component, just load it. So in my example, for example, the headline, X headline, could use a component that, I don't know, does bullet points or something, which doesn't make much sense, but hey, bear with me here. And then another component somewhere uses that, so you would basically rely on browser caching. The browser would download the component once, and then go like, I already have it cached, but it would evaluate it again. So how do you fix that? Well, who of you has seen the Browserify talk yesterday, or who of you uses Browserify or any of the JavaScript modulars? Lots of people, that's good. Because if you should, just to begin with. Anyway, so there's a tool from Google, actually. It's part of the Polymer framework, and it's called Vulcanize. And it does pretty much what Browserify does. So it goes into your document and loads all the web components and puts them all together in one concatenized, minimized file, so that you do not have the HTTP overhead, that you do not have the dependency issues, and it resolves dependencies so that they are only loaded once and in the right order. So what you do is you have your index HTML that loads a ton of components. That's cool. And then you just say, hey, please inline all of these and put them into the build HTML. And the build HTML is then what you actually publish to the world, so that they do not have to have the round trips. So there is a solution. However, this tool so far is very, very early on. It's I think, still alpha, and it may break at any point in time. So that's a bit of a question if it's a good idea to use it. Which brings me to part 3. Are we there yet? Because there's this one big question in all of these tech demos and tech talks and things that you see and hear. When I first heard about web components at the Google I/O 2 years ago, I thought, okay, I got really, really enthusiastic because it solves these problems nicely. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. And then I thought, wait a minute, flashback to reality. No, it won't happen in the next couple of years. Because, I don't want to shame any browsers, but there is one with a blue icon. Anyway, so yeah, there is this problem of when can I actually start using it, or when is it likely that I can use it? And normally the answer is, in a couple of years, it will be finalized as a standard, and then it takes another couple of years, aka decades, until it actually is in most of the browsers that people actually use. Nonetheless, this time the answer is slightly different. It's now, it is there, sort of. What I mean with sort of is that Chrome, for example, does this nicely already. Chrome 36 plus, and I think stable is 37 now, has it fully implemented. All the standards are there. They are not hidden behind any feature flags, and they work. Asterisk. So if you, for example, look at the video element in Chrome, and you set in your inspector settings, in the settings of the DevTools, you can say show shadow DOM, and then there's another checkbox that says show built-in shadow DOM or something for the elements that are shipped with the browser. So even Google doesn't bother anymore with native implementations. They just go like, all right, fine, the video element really is a couple of diffs with things. For example, the range slider, as I said before. So you could then have a CSS selector that says video /deep/ input type range, background blue, for example, or whatever you feel like. So you can reach into these elements, and most of the elements are built in web components in Chrome, and I think in Firefox they start as well. So now, this was the browser compatibility matrix with, ignore that bit. There was a 5th part of the web component spec, which were the decorators, which were supposed to be something, I actually forget it because it never happened anyways. It was something with CSS so that you could decorate elements in certain ways. That will disappear. Ignore that for the moment. But you see, in May this year, early May this year, it didn't look so bad. I mean, there were polyfills for the standards already. HTML imports lacked a bit of explanation. All right, fine. And then we had Chrome and Opera mostly supporting it, one being hidden behind a flag. And then we had Firefox at least trying so far and only having one bug. That's good. Yeah, so that was a good start. And then in late July, that looked like this already. So that looks slightly better. I mean, this is having a bug. All right, fine. This is now behind a flag, so it's mostly done. Interestingly enough, the custom elements went back to being hidden behind a flag, but okay, cool, no worries. But everything else was stable already, so that's a good starting point. Now, yesterday, it looked like this. I was a bit surprised. So Safari now actually is catching on slowly, but hey, they are doing stuff. That's good. Still, HTML imports being hidden behind a flag, but Chrome and Opera, the newer ones, have it fully supported. All right, so you could think that the only problem is older versions of that and the IE, surprise, and Safari being behind as well. But we have polyfills. That is green, so I could just go and use it, right? So first of all, the biggest problem is that it's not just the IE6 that is the problem. It's all the IEs, and it's not just the IEs, it's also the older Android browsers, for example. Android 2 point something has this problem of not being able to. Even the desktop Chrome only since version 36, which is relatively recent. And you could test yourself if you want. And if you look at the results, so this is the template support, and most of the browsers actually do support it that have been tested. However, the sample size is far too small, and it's web developers going there. And I yet have to see a web developer that is actually productively surfing an IE6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or any Internet Explorer anyways. Anyway, but this is looking pretty okay. Well, we have around 84% support in my rundown survey. By the way, visit that with all the weirdest browsers that you can find. If you have an Android device from China, please just point it at that URL, and you will actually contribute to these statistics, which is cool. Anyway, thank you very much if you do. And then we have the Shadow DOM, which is the second best supported so far. And then we have custom elements, which are catching up. And then we have HTML imports being seriously behind, unfortunately. But that's all right. The biggest problem is with the polyfills. It does look good. So the polyfills list, it's the Google polyfill from Polymer, and they list all the features that you would want. So you have the Shadow DOM, you have the HTML imports, you have the custom elements. Templates are missing. All right, fine. You could work around that one. That's not the biggest problem of all the problems possible. And if you think about it, the sheer fact that it supports Shadow DOM is crazy, because Shadow DOM is a browser internal thing. It allows you to reach into the browser and gives you this isolation. So that they can polyfill this, or most of the specification, is amazing. And for that, I would love to say thank you very much, Google, for making this effort. But, as always, there's a but. That polyfill is pretty freaking large, and people are whining about jQuery with, I think, 60-something K. And that's a whopping 131. And yeah, it doesn't get much better when you minify it. It's still 66 versus 19 for jQuery. And people go like, oh, jQuery is so heavyweight. Yeah, it's true. I'm not saying it's wrong, but nah. And the other big problem is that Google says that in the documentation, if you click at the links that they are having here, what they say is that most of the things work, but there's some stuff that just can't be reasonably and simply polyfilled. It's very interesting to see their definition of simply polyfilled, because simply polyfilled in Shadow DOM means 30 lines of regex plus. So that's just for one thing. And I'm like, oh boy. Close, have a coffee, reset your mind. Anyway. And the other problem with the polyfill is, if you look at it, you would say, hey, polyfill is all green, so I can use it in all evergreen browsers. And evergreen browsers is the term which gets tricky. You could say, hey, that means IE8 plus other people say, hey, that means IE 9 plus. Google means, hey, that means IE 10 plus. Yeah, try that in Asian markets. Asian markets still have 10 to 20% IE6 usage and are emerging, so they're very interesting for certain branch industries and companies. But still, it's pretty okay. It does work in most browsers. And that's fine. So let's have another look what you can do with web components, actually. Please, Wi-Fi, do not let me down. So this is Polymer Paper. By the way, if I say Polymer, there's a framework called Polymer. Be really careful when you're talking about Polymer because it is a layered thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all or a one or nothing solution. Polymer is consisting of the polyfill, which is called platform, and that's the thing that is 300 kilobytes. And then you have elements built on top of it that are sort of basic elements that you can use. And then you have a framework on top of these elements where you can have things like navigation. There's a navigation element that you can then use and set to tab and things, and you sort of organize your application, which is cool, but that's basically the same as Angular or Ember or whatever is trying to do. It's a full framework. You do not have to buy yourself into that. You can just use single components. You can just use the polyfill. And I highly recommend you just use the polyfill. But you can use Polymer if you want to. It's very early on as well, so it's a bit shaky. But what they did is very interesting. So with the new material design that came out on the last I/O, they decided to actually build that into web components as well. So now we have the paper elements, which are relatively lightweight elements that you can use just right out of the box, and they look shiny. As you can see, shiny, shiny. And it does stuff, and it looks nice. And there's the radio buttons that does things. And it's reasonably fast on mobile as well, unless you're on an iPhone. And why is that? And the reason that is because the Safari, as we have seen, is so far behind on the native implementations that you just have no other choice than using all the polyfills. I remember, or I remind you that the polyfill for Shadow DOM contains a 30-line regular expression. You're on a mobile device that needs that and the other things. That is a performance bottleneck. However, as the other browsers catch up and more things are implemented in the native browser, it will get better. It will get faster over time. It's just a waiting game for us. Anyway, coming back to the elements, there's some nice stuff. There's these. It turns red and then it goes away when I type stuff in. So that's very nice and shiny. And now I need to figure out how to come back without history. Why is it square bracket? Square bracket is one of the least nicely typed characters on the Swiss keyboard on Mac. Thank you very much for that. Anyway, going to the JS bin. So in this JS bin, I demonstrate how you actually use the paper elements, and it is as simple as I said it's going to be. I have the link rel import that imports that one component, progress HTML, and it imports the other component, which is called the paper button, and I say relation import, and I just have them. Here, paper progress, there you go. Paper button, there you go. Now what if you have seen that it uses this ripple effect in blue. What if I want a different ripple effect? Well, then you could just go to CSS and you do exactly what I described earlier. You say, all right, I have the paper button, and I only want it for the raised buttons because I use a raised button here. And I want the ripple, and I want it in the shadow as well, that it's cyan colored. And I can do this, and it is cyan colored. And to make this visible, I could even use red. Click, click, click. Nice. Another interesting thing is if you look at it closely, look at the ripple, how it works. That's fun. Anyway, enough playing. So that has been that one. And I could also display something else quickly. So speaking of the Polymer project, let's go into it. Because they have something that is very nice, I just have to find it. Exactly, here we go. So that is the Polymer Designer. And that's one of the opportunities that these standards give you. I could now go and say, what do I want? All right, I want a whole application here. I'm done. Woo! This, this is not quite how it should be working, but I could use that. I could actually go into the application and remove bits and pieces. Or I'm a real person who doing real work, and I could just go, okay, I need a code editor, and I need what is a cool clock? That, ladies and gentlemen, is a cool clock. I see that for the first time, and I'm like, that isn't really. Oh, it has a shadow. I take it back. It's cool. Oh no, I wanted to show you something. Oh yeah, you can then. Ooh, how did I do that? All right, cool. I have a chart, so I could now go and make this red, which turns it into black. Right. That's why it's called alpha or beta. That's pretty fun. Or I could go here and edit the text content to actually have a different text content. Hello, and then I guess when I update it, it ignores me. That's fun. Right. However, you can build applications with this. It's just to play around and just to see what you can do. It's not really super ready for anything yet. And if I register, well, log in. Oh no, why would you do that? I do not have my authenticator here. There is a possibility to do interesting things like this, for example. Nope, not that. Yeah, getting better. Here, yesterday, or a long time ago, I just built a terminal just for the fun of it because I wanted a fake terminal that I could use JavaScript with to actually have fake commands running. And yesterday I decided, hey, why not make it a web component? And that happens. And I'm like, what? It's because I have the wrong URL here. And so this is a terminal, obviously. And I could do things like help. All right, it allows me to say, hello, frontend con 14. Yay. I could say weather Zurich, and now it gets interesting because it goes into the internet. Yay, light intensity. What, really? Oh, boy, no, I don't have a jacket. Anyway, and it's 16 degrees. That has been higher a couple of hours ago. Anyway, and how does that work? How does that look like? You could do things like this. So this is a bit small-ish. I'll make it a bit large-ish. I'm styling the document that it contains. I use the fake terminal component, and then I just do fake terminal, guess that terminal.js, and some things for HTML to make it look like a cursor. And the terminal is set up by just using a JavaScript object that holds properties that are functions that are then returning the HTML that is going to be inserted into the terminal. So the hello function is the easiest thing ever. It complains if you do not tell me your name. If you do actually tell me your name, it just returns that. The weather thing is using an XHR request, and that's it. And then you just initialize that by saying, my fake terminal commands should be this object, and you're done, and you have a working fake terminal. So as I'm reaching the end of my talk, I should try to get back into my, oh boy, where are my slides? I'll come back to them at some point. Ah, yeah, there we go. So that was the demos. There's a couple of useful links in the slides as well if you need them. So that goes to Polymer. That's another framework, Xtext from Mozilla. It uses the same platform polyfill, but it builds its own elements on top of it. There's also Brick, which is a collection of elements of Xtext. There's custom elements.io, which is a collection of text based on Polymer. And Vulcanize is the tool that I said is going to be sort of browserify for web components. The Mozilla App Maker, as I learned this morning, is sort of defunctional at the moment, unfortunately. If you get it running locally, that is a pretty cool application that my nephew, who's 4 years old, used to build a mobile app that it's a component, so it's not too fancy, but he dragged a component firework, and then he dragged a component button. And when you click the button, it sends a red signal, and then you just wire the red channel to the fireworks fire event. And so he had an app on the phone where he could click a button and it would fire a small fireworks rocket and go ba-doom, which is pretty impressive if you think that he's 4. So, and that's basically what web components for me are. They are the Lego of the web. You can build stuff easily. You can just put components together. If you, unlike Lego, if you do not find the right piece, you just build it yourself. Fine, you can do that with 3D printers, but giving a 3D printer to a 4-year-old is a dangerous thing, I think. So recap, reusable custom HTML elements, that's what web components are about. You have 4 standards for the 4 different parts of concerns that you need to cover. It's supported in most major browsers through polyfills, and natively is coming. IE and Safari are a bit behind, IE being even more behind than Safari. Start trying them. Start breaking them. Help the platform to evolve, because the platform should get some love from you because it gives love to you as well. And I think it's just fair. Thanks a lot. That was my talk. Thanks for listening. I hope it was useful. All right. I think we have time for questions. 2 questions, I see. 2 questions. Questions? Anyone? Questions? Come on. Don't be shy. That's a question. Surprised that I got through this so fast.
Thanks. Right. Yeah, thanks for your talk. I have a question regarding dependencies. So you said a sentence or 2 about vulcanize.
Yes.
But how does it work in the real world? So say I have 2 components and they both use some sort of JavaScript library and I use them in my website. Do they load that? Do you bundle that together with them and then send it there? How do you deal with that?
It really depends, as is the answer for all the questions in IT generally. To be more precise, so both is possible. So you could just, if you're developing or prototyping, you just throw the components together into your site, and then the browser goes, here's the first component. Oh, that first component uses Zepto 1.0, so I'm going to download that, and it's going to be available when this thing is going to be parsed. Then it goes off to the next one and goes, okay, so this one needs Zepto 1.2, so I'm going to load that as well, and I'm going to put it in. And it doesn't conflict because it is actually bundled into the current script things, so you can sort of limit yourself to a certain scope. That is possible, that works. The downside obviously is, think mobile, think shaky connections, think slow connections, think expensive connections. You don't want that. So you have the possibility to say, I'm going to vulcanize that one. And then vulcanize is going to do the same steps at compile time, if you so wish, and goes, okay, so here's Zepto 1.1, here's Zepto 1.2. All right, I'm going to download both of them and put them in and make sure that everything's bundled in one go. If you're lucky, each and every component that you have uses the same version of the libraries. So, for example, if it uses all use the same version of Zepto, for example, then that would not happen, that it actually puts it in twice, but it would go, okay, so I have this. Oh, this needs it again. All right, I'm fine because I already have this covered. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, you're welcome. And I highly recommend doing the vulcanize step for production use. By the way, speaking of production use, there is one large website that you probably all at least know or use that is actually using web components now, which is GitHub. However, they decided not to use all the web component standards. They just use custom elements. They do not use Shadow DOM. They do not use HTML imports. They do not use template elements. Why is that? Because the custom elements polyfill, if you use just the custom elements polyfill, is 1.4K if it's gzipped, or 4K if it's not gzipped, or something like that. And it's reasonably easy to do that because you do not have to grab that much into the browser. You just have this document register element and some funkiness and one CSS selector, and that's it. And if you would want to try web components as of today, that is probably the best plan for you. Start with custom components, just with custom components, because they still reasonably fall back if you use the right elements. So for example, in GitHub, it's the time ago. What they do is when you browse the repositories, you see commit 4 days ago. That is basically a time element. So even if your browser is an IE6, it still looks nice. It just looks not so nice. It's then just a date. If you have a reasonable browser, then that uses the polyfill. If you have a reasonable, awesome browser, then it actually is native. And then you have custom elements ready. And it's not a big impact, but it's nice for you as a developer to work with this. And it's really simple to get there. Any other questions?
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. So the idea with web components, right, is you have these reusable components that can be kind of placed wherever. So you could be pulling them in from different places on the web. You could be using them within your project in different places throughout your site. One of the things that I've always thought feels like it's lacking right now, I understand there's a lot of difficulty involved, is element queries for web components. Being able to say that the web component, if placed in a container X wide, should behave or appear this way, and if it's Y wide, it should display in a different way. Mm-hmm. Has there been any more recent conversation or exploration about element media queries in that context?
You hit an interesting spot. The quick answer is I don't know of any conversation that has happened. However, I now wonder, and that's a really, really interesting question. I now wonder because you can access the host context, so you can query your element that surrounds you. And I wonder if that allows you to then also specify media queries. That you say, hey, is the content that or is the div or whatever that I'm in, how large is that? How small? How narrow is that? How whatever is that? I'm not entirely sure if that works because I haven't tried it with media queries, but I would think so. If not, that is a good input for the specification group to fix. You're welcome.
Thank you, Martin.
You're welcome.
And